This is Superhero Survival Skills for Faculty, a practical guide to surviving and thriving online. The first of a two-part series on remote instruction. I'm Liz Weist, Director of Education at the Association of Schools and Programs of Public Health. Next. By the end of this webinar, our promise to you is that you'll be able to describe elements of a successful online learning experience, identify pitfalls many instructors make when transitioning to online learning, apply best practices in designing and teaching online. The presenters welcome comments and questions from you anytime during the webinar. Go ahead and type your reactions into the Q&A box right here at the bottom of your screen. And you type your comments or questions in the box you see there. Your moderator for today is Dr. Mary Catherine McNatt, the Public Health Department Chair at A.T. Still University College of Graduate Health Studies. She has been involved in online teaching and course development for more than 10 years and enjoys working toward keeping courses innovative and experiential. Please join in welcoming our moderator, Dr. McNatt, to the mic.
Hi, thank you. I'm very happy to be here today. And today I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have some great panelists today. Our first one is Sue McDaniel. She's an instructional designer in the College of Graduate Health Studies at A.T. Still University. She's been with us since 2009, first working in the University Writing Center before making the transition to instructional designer in 2010. Prior to that, she worked as a community college web developer and instructional designer. She also has a BS in home economics and an MS instructional design and technology from Western Illinois University, a degree she earned as an online student. She's taught faculty development sessions for more than 20 years and loves to help design the online courses. She and her husband and 17-year-old daughter live in a farm in southeast Iowa. She and her daughter also barrel race, and in 2006, she was the Iowa NBHA champion in senior 4D. Susan Thomas is our other panelist today. She's also an instructional designer at ATSU in the College of Graduate Health Studies. Prior to working at ATSU, she was a senior instructional designer for Truman State University for 10 years. She started her educational journey as a K-12 music teacher in rural Missouri. She graduated from Truman State in 1990 with a bachelor's in music education. She holds a master's in education with a specialization in instructional design for online learning from Capella University in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which she received in 2013. Her hobbies include boating, camping, gardening, and singing. She and her husband, Ken, live in a century farm in northeastern Missouri. Now, it's a real treat to have these ladies with us today. They work very closely with us in designing all our MPH courses, as well as competency alignment and interaction for all of the students. So they're very, very well skilled, and they spend lots of hours with us and our students. So please welcome Susan and Sue. Thank you.
There we go. It was not letting me unmute. Thank you, Mary Catherine. It's really great to be here and to hopefully share some things that will make your lives easier, because I know it's probably been a little tough the last couple of months. In fact, making the transition from the classroom to online at a moment's notice has truly made you the superheroes of 2020. That's an amazing pivot, and while things may not have always gone smoothly, I want you to first acknowledge that you did an awesome job under the circumstances. Nobody could have prepared for what we just went through. We know the past few months haven't been easy. It's been a big shift to change from a face-to-face classroom to a remote one. And it's even more challenging when you're doing it alone, without the help of instructional designers, educational technologists, and others more familiar with the medium. We'll talk about some of the things those people usually help with on Thursday. Today, we want to talk a little bit about more global ideas, student-centered learning, best practices for online education, a few legal issues, and then some tools that will help you survive and navigate this possibly unfamiliar world. At the same time, we want you to ask questions. Any question you have is not off limits, and don't be afraid to ask it. As we tell our students, if you have a question, there's probably someone else who is thinking the same thing. So be brave. And we've probably had the same question ourselves too at one time. So let's talk about navigating the shift to online, or in this case, really remote teaching. because there is a difference between remote teaching in a crisis situation and creating online courses with thoughtful, purposeful instructional design. You know, your students and the courses didn't disappear. We still need to serve those students to the best of our ability. And our content hasn't changed, but how we deliver it and share it with the students has. But we can be comfortable knowing that the students are still going to learn, regardless of whether it's in the classroom or online. In fact, some of us were already using the flipped classroom model, in which our students are expected to do some of their learning ahead of the classroom session and then come into class prepared to dive deeper into the content and interact with it in various ways. Susan, you're muted.
We've been doing online education at ATSU since 1999. And in that 20 years, we've learned a thing or two about online and distance education, and maybe a thing or two about what doesn't work as well. Regardless of the method of delivery, though, we feel that the learner-centered approach really gets the students actively involved in their learning, and the learning sticks better. So what is a learner-centered approach? Young and Paterson described it as focusing on skills and practices that enable lifelong learning and independent problem solving. So this means a lot fewer multiple choice tests and a lot more student choice in ways to demonstrate their learning. So we'll talk about some examples of that later, but this allows students to be more active participants in the learning process. So while you might decide the overall topics for the course, allowing the students to have a voice in how they learn or demonstrate their learning or evaluate their learning gives them some skin in the game and engages them more than the lecture exam strategy. This changes your role a bit too. In the student-centered learning, the teacher is a guide on the side. Students make the connections between the topic and the real world. It's important that the instructor stays present in the online course. Students need that guidance to help them understand the course content, and again, make the connections between new knowledge and what they already know. Finally, there's the content of your course. Rather than learning through lectures and exams, we found that collaborative learning works well. Students can learn from one another in a variety of ways online, and this provides an opportunity to learn real-world team-building skills. Sometimes you have to get a bit creative, but as we know, students often hate group projects. But if you can help them make the connection, they will learn many soft skills, such as cross-functional communication and learning and leading a group. And those are skills that really are essential in the workplace and that employers are looking for. Content should also be organized into reasonable chunks of information. For example, it's difficult for adults to focus on one thing for more than about 10 minutes. Trying to watch a 60-minute lecture in one sitting would almost be impossible. Therefore, break up your lecture into smaller, more digestible sections, and you will reduce cognitive load on the student. Not surprisingly, there are 3 types of engagement that help you create a positive student experience. And just a hint, these can be used in your face-to-face classroom as well. They look a lot like elements of successful distance education that we just looked at. The first is what we normally think of happening in your classrooms. Student to content engagement. What are students doing with the content they're learning? And how are they engaging these topics? There are a lot of ways to provide student content interaction online. For example, you might write a summary or create a visual, an infographic, for example. You might have them list takeaways and one question from their reading. They could diagram a process for you. There's just a wide variety of things that they can do. The second type of engagement is student-to-student engagement. This involves getting the students to interact with one another. While this may be somewhat challenging online, our students, especially the younger ones, are pretty savvy at getting to know others they've never met in person. So, however, don't assume because a student is young, they know how to use technology or are comfortable in the online space. In fact, we find a lot of times students need some guidance when it comes to figuring out how to be a student in an online world. In a discussion forum where the students are asked to introduce themselves, some of my students discovered that several of them like to knit, and they formed a knitting club amongst themselves and continue to interact with one another outside of class. They may even hold a Zoom session where they get together and knit and just visit. So what can you do to foster student-to-student interaction? There's the standby of online classrooms, the discussion forum. However, remember to truly ask discussable questions. Asking students to restate concepts in their own words or define something will generate similar answers and won't give students much to respond to. However, if you ask them questions where they can take sides, form and support an opinion, or include examples from their professional or personal lives, you can see a whole new side, a whole new life that takes place in the forum.
That was not supposed to advance that many. Sorry about that. Let's see if we can go back. Where did we go? We went a long ways back. All right, let's talk about one of the things I wanted to mention, because no student will ever say they like group projects. But as the professional work world moves to more and more remote teams, kind of like we've had to deal with in the last 3 months, group work is a skill that needs to be fostered. I remember one group project in my graduate school work. I was in a team with one man who was unemployed. So he had his reading done Monday morning. You know, the modules opened at 8 and he was done and couldn't understand why everybody else wasn't ready to discuss our project at noon. The other team member was a fireman who didn't usually get around to his coursework till about Thursday. So balancing the needs of those two was a real challenge. Kind of like sometimes I felt like I was the only sane one. But I told the instructor after the semester was over, I said I was really frustrated at times with the two of these people on my team. But I got the experience of not only completing the coursework, but learning to manage these two very different personalities. And for that, I was grateful.
So other things you could do to foster student-to-student interaction include peer reviews and individual projects that are created to help others. One of these that we use in several of our courses involves having students find a software or other resource that they found useful and then write a review of that software or resource and post it in a class wiki. At the end of the assignment, then the students have a verified list that's been vetted of 10 to 15 things that can help them with their coursework. That way they have something they can take with them when they leave that course and use to help them be successful in other courses. Another option is Think, Pair, Share, in which you can provide students with a case study, give them the option to review it, pair them off with a partner, and then have them share their reflection with each other.
The third type of engagement that creates a positive student experience is student-teacher engagement. Teachers are absolutely essential in the online space. Students need you to connect the dots for them. Imagine being given a PowerPoint slide deck, maybe even something like this one, without any speaker notes. It would be very challenging to understand the message without someone helping you interpret it. And that's the same for students online. So you can help them connect those dots in several ways. For starters, participate in the discussion forums. Our school requires instructors to participate a minimum of 10%. Mary Catherine's program and some of the others prefer an even higher number, sometimes up to 20% of the time. So that really helps the students get to know that instructor. You know, it's the instructor's opportunity to model critical thinking, help students who are struggling with concepts, expand upon ideas, push the students farther. I know that I've learned a lot from my online students in the discussion forums, and I've discovered some new perspectives, things that I really had not thought about before, and I've learned from all of their experiences. Provide lots and lots and lots of feedback, including not only how they can improve, but also what they did well. I found a lack of feedback to be frustrating in my online graduate work. I'd get, you know, maybe 95, 100% of the points on an assignment and no comments. So it was kind of frustrating. It's like, what did I do well? You know, there's still things that I could be doing better, even though it was, you know, it's filled all the blanks in the rubric. Timeliness also counts. Make sure your feedback on assignments is timely in order for it to be most effective. Our policy at ATSU is that all assignments will be graded within 96 hours of the deadline. Some programs even require it to be within 72 hours. So show your students that you're human. Record videos, considering ADA compliance, of course, or announcements to explain or clarify assignments or concepts. Share stories of your life. Share stories about the content. Let students know you're struggling sometimes too. You can hold synchronous meetings such as office hours. These again will help you engage your students on a more personal level. Just don't make them mandatory. It can be tough for students to work these into their schedules. If you absolutely must have a synchronous meeting, schedule more than one and offer a variety of times, like maybe a Tuesday evening, a Thursday morning, or vice versa, something on the weekend, something that allows them some flexibility, because obviously we need to be flexible. You may need to accommodate situations more than you did in a residential class. Students absolutely need you. Your presence in the course is so important, and even more so when you're working with students at a distance. You're the one to help students maintain their interest, their motivation, and their engagement with the content. Other ways you can show your presence: announcements, weekly, at a minimum, and maybe even daily. I know a lot of our instructors will post them 2 or 3 times a week. Communicate your response time to student questions. So if a student is going to email you a question, you can say that I always will respond to you within 48 hours, sometimes within 24, but then make sure that you respond within that time frame that you tell them. Again, interacting in the discussion forums regularly throughout the week, because you're modeling that good behavior of getting into the course and working with it daily. Giving feedback on assignments, and being accessible by sharing different ways to contact you. Our instructors are encouraged to share phone numbers, offer text messaging to students if they so choose, email, instant message. It's okay to have preferred methods of contact. You know, maybe you just want them to use the course messages system and or your phone number, but you can also set limits on that time, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., for example. And again, it's important to let students know how long it may take for you to respond to them. In general, online students expect a little bit faster response than residential students. For example, less than 24 hours to most email messages. They do seem to be a little more lenient when it comes to more traditional communication methods like phone calls. They'll cut you a little more slack there, but they definitely do know when you aren't available in the course, when you're just phoning it in.
So true, Sue. A couple of things. You can replicate your face-to-face class online, but as Sue pointed out a minute ago, you probably shouldn't. While students previously had scheduled to be in your residential class, the current situation may preclude you from being available for synchronous meetings, you know, with adjusted work schedules, caring for family members, competing demands for technology within a household. You know, now that students are home for the summer and or indefinitely, take advantage of the strengths of online, which we'll discuss shortly. This really is your opportunity to connect this information with what the students already know. So it's kind of a scaffolding, if you will, and tell them why it's important. Long lectures. There are some faculty who post hours-long lectures as the talking head videos. I don't know about you, but I can hardly watch a YouTube video on a topic that I'm interested in for longer than about 10 minutes. So shorter chunk videos allow students to focus on the information that you're sharing in a reasonable and manageable amount of time. 5 minutes or less seems to work well for most course content, although you can go up to 10 minutes for content that needs more detailed explanation. What about the read this and take a test type of course? So while that is often our go-to strategy, it is not really very engaging. And so you may want to change up your strategies to keep the learners engaged online. Use readings, videos, websites. TED Talks are always great. Khan Academy videos are also really good. Professional organization websites, government websites. Honestly, the internet is an endless source of information. So while we're talking about that, you can also help your students evaluate the credibility of all of the resources that are available at their fingertips. So interaction is super important. An online course should not be an independent course. So we don't want, again, we don't want it phoned in. It's no longer a correspondence type course as people originally thought of online. Online allows two people from different geographic areas, different age groups, different walks of life to learn from one another. One of the goals really is to create a learning community, and it's important that you are a part of that as well. So think about that student-teacher content structure we talked about earlier.
Susan, we have a great question regarding creating that sense of community. So one of the questions is, do instructors give out personal phone numbers or office phone numbers?
Honestly, it may be at the discretion of that particular faculty member. I personally, because I work from home, when I'm adjunct teaching as well as doing my instructional designer role, I give my cell phone out to my students. And I always try to put in there the best times for a student to reach me, as well as the best way to reach me. So, you know, for me, you know, I may give them, you know, the times of day that I'm around and my cell phone number, but then I also tell them if they need to reach me alternative hours, they can always text me. Text first is usually the best way to reach me, especially in this day and age when we're all getting so many junk vendor phone calls, things like that. The best way to really reach me is via text. So I think it's perfectly appropriate to state the method that works best for you and the number that works best for you. Great question.
Thank you. Thanks. And I believe the majority of our faculty in our department do the same thing. They'll post their cell phone numbers, and many of them do get a cell phone allowance now because of that. And a lot of the students will send them texts, and they'll put that between the hours of, for example, I'm in Central Time, I'll put between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. Central Time, and they can call or send a text, and they're very good at doing those. We have one more question right now. Sure. Has ASPPH considered making these webinars accessible regarding closed captioning? That is an ASPPH question, I'm not sure, but I did want to say that Thursday's webinar is on closed captioning and ADA compliance, so that one was pretty timely. But I'm going to turn it back over to you guys. Thank you.
All right. So while we're talking about expectations and the instructor setting expectations, that really is a great segue into the next part, which is talking about making sure your instructions are crystal clear. So make sure your instructions in your course are as clear as possible, especially online when you don't have that luxury of seeing a student in your class looking confused at your instructions. having somebody read through those for you, a family member, a colleague, can be really critical because it gives you, you're so close to your own content, having somebody else look it over and make sure your instructions are clear to somebody else can be very important. So know that you'll probably have to answer questions multiple times for students, even online. So provide them with multiple avenues to ask you those questions. At ATSU, we use, and this is something that also Quality Matters is very big on, is an Ask Your Instructor area in every course. And it's a discussion where students can ask questions of you. And that way, if they have a question, more than likely another person in the course will have the same question. They can get it answered without you having to answer the question multiple times. Also, your contact information, as we just talked about. And then I personally, sometimes when the instructions in a course aren't crystal clear, I may create a video, especially if the instructions maybe are complicated and I just know I'm going to have questions from students. I may create a video and upload it in the announcements so that students can see it, say, a week in advance of an assignment. I know Sue has created step-by-step tutorials in some of the courses that she's taught as well. So communication isn't a one-way street in the online world. Students need to be able to engage with one another as well as with you. And we've found that as we've gone through this quarantine period, that we tend to engage with one another a lot more than we used to when working remotely 3 days a week. The need for interaction is truly important. And I know in speaking with Sue and I meet practically every day. And sometimes it's not even to be working on a project. It may just be that we need that interaction with one another to feel that connection. And students need a similar type of connection.
Yeah, sometimes it's more than once a day.
Very true.
Yes, it is. All right. Well, that's enough of the pitfalls. We don't want to tell you what you shouldn't do. We want to talk about what you should do and give you some ideas to make your foray into the online world a very positive one. First of all, let's focus on the learning, not on the medium of online. Your content is your content. It doesn't change regardless of how it's delivered to your students. Sure, there's some things that can't be done online, you know, like I don't want my surgeon to come from an online program. But if you're creative, there are always ways to accomplish what you need. So let's look at some student content interaction in your course. You can use this opportunity to help students learn where to look for answers. Help them learn to seek the answers rather than looking to you to provide them all the time, you know, kind of like when you send them to the library. You can send them on virtual field trips to all kinds of places now have webcams available that are monitoring things from bald eagle eggs to zoos and ocean fronts, things like that. You know, if that works with your content, send students there. Send them on a web quest, similar to a scavenger hunt. Give them some questions that relate to your content and have them go out and see what they can find for answers. You know, we talked about case studies earlier. How can they apply what you're teaching them to the real world? That's really critical. That's authentic assessment at its finest. Allow students to draw from their own experience, share what they've learned in the past that could help others. And, you know, there's always, my favorite is the kitchen lab. I had a community college science professor who had her students doing experiments using kitchen supplies. Those were really interesting. Another opportunity you have through online is to build in some redundancy or review materials for those students who might need some additional guidance. You know, rather than taking up the class time to help one or two students who are struggling, they can get that extra attention that they need online without slowing anybody else down. And these could be in the form of self-check quizzes, supplemental materials, Again, some of these other things that we've talked about, searching for the answer in a web quest, that kind of thing. So here is a list of sites that could be very, very helpful to you as you're creating your online content. These are open educational resources, or OERs, that you can use to modify for your classroom, or you can use them straight out of the box. And I would highly recommend that you either write them down right now or take a quick screenshot. Mary Catherine can also tell this story. When I first started at ATSU, I was assigned to the public health program, and that was the only courses that I worked on. And one of the first things I saw was this scary named course called epidemiology. Not gonna lie, I didn't know what it was. I knew it was scary. So I thought I needed to get more familiar with what it was. So I went to Merlot and I did a search for epidemiology. And I found this really wonderful simulation. I believe it's from the University of Minnesota. It's called Outbreak at Water's Edge. And it walks you through kind of a very oversimplified situation where you're using epidemiology skills to figure out why people are getting sick from the water. And the light bulb went off. It clicked. It made sense to me. We use that in our courses. We've been using that in our courses for 10 years now. And I don't think we're going to quit anytime soon.
I doubt it. Just to kind of tie into what Sue said here and looking at these helpful resources, as an instructional designer, I will tell you some of these open educational resources are the first place we look because it can be a huge time saver. There is no point in reinventing the wheel if the wheel has already been created. So they are certainly a good place to start. And a lot of these open educational resources also allow you some flexibility in manipulating them or changing them to meet your needs. So it may be a good starting point, if nothing else. It may give you a good template or a par-baked activity that you can start with. So let's talk for a minute again about student-to-student interaction. Discussion boards in an online environment really offer an opportunity for students to collaborate and build relationships with one another, as do group activities. In fact, students suggest that some students fare better in an online discussion because they have time to reflect and process your questions in advance before answering. If you've ever taught in a face-to-face environment, we've all had that one student who raises their hand every single time and can answer every single question. And while that's great that they're able to do that, it does limit some of the participation of other students. And some people who are maybe more introverted or just need that thoughtful reflection time really do fare well in the online environment and being able to think about a question before answering. Discussion prompts can be unique and creative. Here's one we use in an environmental health sciences course. The student has to take the toxicokinetic topic assigned and explain it to a third grader. So add another dimension to that discussion. It's limited to 200 words, and it forces the student then to choose their words carefully. So this is just an example for you to view. And here are some of the responses from the students. And here's a different take on the initial post. The students have to create a public service announcement. They can create just the script with suggestions or visuals, or go all out and create the actual video. The majority of students write the script, but there are a few individuals who create their own videos as well. And these would be a great product to add to their portfolios to show to a potential employer. Finally, here's a discussion prompt that asks the students to create tweets for a potential social media campaign on Twitter. Using social media is a great way to engage new audiences or for public health messages. So this assignment was originally created when Twitter allowed only 140 characters. It has since been changed, Twitter has, to allow 280 character messages, and the instructor noted that in the announcement to students. A few students misread the instructions and assume it's 140 words and not 280 words, leading to a teachable moment. And we'll show you some of the student tweets.
Yeah, I've gone back and looked at some of the responses in this assignment. These guys are really creative. I love some of the things that they come up with. This is actually one of my favorite assignments that we use. And it can be used in a wide variety of courses, you know. You could even go back in history and, you know, if this historical figure was tweeting in the past, what would they say? You know, kind of interesting. So, all right, well, we've doggone it. It's about these toggle buttons here. We've looked at a few examples of how students will obtain the information on your content and topics and how they can interact and learn from one another. Now, how are you going to assess this? You have to kind of think of assessment as continuous and ongoing with different assessment activities at different times in the learning process. Maybe you start with a low stakes quiz to assess whether or not the students did the reading, and then a muddiest point journal maybe to help them understand concepts that weren't clear. This allows the students some room to fail and helps them build their confidence before progressing to a higher stakes assessment. And you know, that's really important. Give them a chance to kind of feel their way and navigate before you hit them with the more critical, higher stakes, more important assessments. And this allows you to monitor their progress as well. For instance, in the case of the discussion forum examples earlier, those are practice opportunities for the end of the course assessment that has the students building a portfolio of those various communication pieces for a specific audience on a specific topic. So they have to build tweets and a public service announcement and an infographic. And Mary Catherine, did you have something to add to those? Because I know you've taught that class.
Yeah, we actually have some questions about those assignments. So one of the questions from the audience was, how do you handle the burden of TAs or faculty when discussion boards are used as a graded assignment? Even with word limits, this represents a lot of time reading and grading. So regarding that, so all the times we have discussions, we always use them as graded assignments. The reason being, students will not participate in a discussion board if you do not use them as a graded assignment. They will blow it off. But we also feel that discussions can be very valuable. It's a lot of interactive learning from one another as well as from the faculty. We also do not use TAs. Our faculty, we feel that their experiences are very valuable to share with the students. All of our faculty have experience in the field, and that's very valuable for them to share with the students. We also limit our courses to about 15 students. So that kind of helps ease that burden. Also, we do put rubrics in every course, and the IDs can talk to you a little bit more about that, but that helps with the grading. So we make sure that there are rubrics so that the faculty have like a grading scale to go on. And so that kind of helps them. Do you want to add any more to that answer?
I would just add that there are some great tools out there if you are, you know, just looking for things to make grading discussions easier. There are some plugins or add-ins through Google Chrome that will do a word count if you're concerned about, you know, having word counts that students have to meet. Generally speaking, I don't do it unless I see a student who it's pretty clear we're short. Then I may do a word count, but you can literally just highlight the words, right click, and it counts the words for you. So there are some nice tools like that out there to make life a little easier when doing that grading of a discussion. Sue, did you have anything?
Yeah, and I think that it comes down to asking the right questions.
Agreed.
You know, give them something that is really they're able to discuss. You know, can they take different sides? Can they disagree on something? Can they go find support for something or disprove something? Can they add their own personal experience? I can't tell you how many of the discussions in some of these courses when I first joined ATSU were, tell me the difference between qualitative and quantitative of research. Well, after the first person answers that question, there's no more discussion because there's really nothing to discuss. That's a question answer. There's not a discussion. So make sure that there's something in there that has some meat to it, something that they can really sink their teeth into and learn from.
And if you don't control your content, if it's kind of given to you to teach, a lot of times I've taught courses like that where the discussion isn't that discussable. I try to interject as often as possible and add thought-provoking things that can help just keep that discussion going and maybe take it in a new, more creative direction. So I try to give authentic examples. So, you know, imagine that you're a program director of a hospital during a COVID-19 pandemic. How would you handle this situation? So there are always ways to spruce it up, if you will.
Right, and if you're active in the discussion during the week, when it comes time to grading, you pretty much know, you're familiar with the discussions, with the different conversations going on, and it'll be a lot easier to grade them. The next question we have was, do you provide students with information about what components are in a PSA prior to assigning the task? The answer is yes. Anything that we assess a student on or grade them on, they are provided with. For example, if it's a PSA, they're provided with how to create an effective and efficient PSA. If it's a PowerPoint, how to create a PowerPoint that's not, you know, death by PowerPoint. If it's a research brief, how to create a research brief. In addition to the topic and the content, they are also given, you know, tools as to how to create or do what they're doing. And that's part of what the instructional designers do, is make sure that everything is in there that they need to create the task and be assessed on the task that we're giving them. Any more to add to that?
No, I mean, you covered that.
Okay, the next one is actually a great question. It says, not all content lends itself to 10 minutes or less. For example, this webinar today, I teach in a health profession, and this has been our biggest challenge with online instruction, especially when we only have 1 week to change over. That's exactly right. Not everything is 10 minutes or less, especially one great example is biostats. And what our biostats professor did, and she's excellent, and she actually got a Faculty of the Year this year. She has a lot of mini sessions reported there in the biostats course, because not everything's 10 minutes or less, but if you have one really long video, you're going to lose the students. So rather than have, you know, a 60-minute video, record 6 10-minute videos, or, you know, 5, I'm not sure, I'm not a math major, but 5 short, you know, lots of like 10 really 6-minute videos, but a lot of short videos, you know, and break them out by topics, because they're going to be a lot more effective rather than one really long video if you're trying to record, you know, through videos. You guys want to talk some more about that?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if we were to do this webinar today in a format for a classroom, I guarantee that we would be chunking each section that Susan has talked about would be a separate video, maybe even 1 or 2. You know, and the same with my sections. They would be 1 or 2 videos within each section. So we would chunk this content down even more.
And then, yeah, and the next question is, do you provide the rubric for the assignment with the assignment? Yes, every assignment is provided with a rubric along with the assignment. So the student can click on the assignment description and then click on the rubric if they want detailed assignments. or detailed rubric breakdown. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to you guys. There's a few more questions, but we'll wait till the end because those
and
are
it's
more.
funny because you mentioned rubrics, and that's kind of where I'm going next, because whatever assessment method you choose, you need to absolutely be sure that your assessment is linked to your learning objectives, to the activities you give to the students to create that assessment, and the expected outcomes of your class. So you may, and in this particular situation in the past several months, you might even want to consider a pass-fail approach to some of your assessments. I know my daughter's high school did that. Unfortunately, she was looking forward to the second half of the semester to kind of bump her grades up, and that didn't work, but at least she passed rather than had the grade she had going into quarantine. So anyway, here we go again. You were talking about rubrics. Here's some websites that can help you get started creating your rubrics. You can write these down, take a screenshot, whatever. As Mary Catherine said, every assignment that we have in our courses has a rubric, because you don't have that opportunity to explain to students in detail what your expectations are. And we also want to make sure that the expectations are the same across the board. So if Susan and I teach this same course but different sections, we want to know that the students will be graded at least on the same criteria, no matter which section they're in. So as I said, they're essential to help you communicate your expectations. If you've never written a rubric, you need to know that they're hard. It's just hard to write a good rubric at first. Plan on taking some time to do it. But in the end, it's going to help you by reducing the number of questions you get both before and after the assessment. Think of it this way. How often do students ask you questions about an assignment after class? Now think about the online student who doesn't have that after class session to ask you those things. And we learned just recently that often in grade challenges, our dean has to go back and use those rubrics to determine whether or not that grade challenge is valid. If he has the same criteria that the instructor used, it's a lot easier and more consistent and will back you up completely. All right. Remote teaching gives you a great opportunity to stretch those assessment ideas. One thing we like to do is offer students choices in how they demonstrate their learning and connect it to what they already know. So for instance, a student could create a presentation like a conference presentation, or they could draft a research brief, taking the information and translating it to a professional or public audience. They could create an infographic targeted to children or teens or adults in a specific community. They could draft a letter to the editor of a publication or a government official. And as you asked, we do provide some guidance in how to create those items before we ask the students to do that. But oftentimes when we're working with a faculty member, an SME, to develop a course, we ask them to think about how the students will use the information in the future and then tailor that assessment to that situation so it's more authentic. It gives them deliverables that they could share with a potential employer. Additionally, you could give them reflection assignments. Ask questions like, in what ways did this assignment change your views about the topic? What did you find most challenging? What do you want to know more about? What did you discover that surprised you? Those are all valid reflection questions that can really help you see how the students are thinking and how they're processing that information.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about some best practices when it comes to meeting with your students and perhaps even using Zoom. So I thought we used Zoom a lot before March 1st. Turns out it was going to become a huge part of everyone's lives. So by now, everyone, it seems like, has heard about Zoom. And I wish I would have bought stock in it 7 years ago when I started teaching people about how to use it. Many of you have probably seen the video of the man in a work meeting who got up from his chair to do something, not realizing that his colleagues could see him not wearing pants. And you definitely don't want that happening, and especially not in front of your students. So my first piece of advice to you, if you're going to meet synchronously with your online students, is always get dressed before your conference. At the very least, make sure you're professionally dressed from the waist up. Always have your video on whenever possible. We know sometimes your internet struggles to keep up, and certainly we understand if you get the dreaded message that your internet is unstable. If that happens, by all means, turn off your camera, but make sure your students understand why you're turning off your camera. I know in my household right now, because of the importance of this meeting, for example, I've asked all family members to refrain from using the internet until we're done. If you can, stage your video area. Remember, the people in your meeting can see not only you, but your surroundings. No one should have that pile of unfolded laundry in the background. Fortunately, if you have a relatively plain background behind you, Zoom offers you that ability where you can add a virtual background if you would like, which I'm going to do. And by now, I would assume most of you know what this background probably is. The coronavirus. I showed that to a biology teacher who was very interested in talking about the topic, and it was nice for her to be able to have that up in the background. So as you're doing your sessions, make sure you keep an eye on the lighting in your area. If you've made the effort to get all dressed up and be presentable, you want people to actually see your face. So having forward-facing lighting is very important. Make sure if you can, if you're not that comfortable yet with online or even recording yourself, looking at the webcam. I have always kind of pretended that the webcam is a student, so that there's always a light on mine when it's on, and I know if I look directly at that, then that the person on the other end is connecting with me, and I'm not looking down somewhere else and losing that contact with the person. So if you can, stay on mute when you're not talking, and remember, of course, to unmute when it's your turn. And don't eat or do private things while in a meeting. It's important really to stay focused, and others can tell when you're distracted and looking around at other things. So be patient. Some of your students may not be comfortable yet with Zoom. They're getting more comfortable. It's important to encourage them and help guide them in their efforts. So leading by example is really important in Zoom. If you post your videos to students on YouTube, you may want to adjust your privacy settings as well. So videos can be made public, private, or unlisted. And I'm just going to kind of briefly go through that to give you a sense, because I think it's important, especially as we talk about student privacy, that there are different settings available. So there is the public setting, which is searchable by anyone on the internet. That does not limit. Obviously, that's the most public version. There is a private setting as well. The private is really are videos that can only be seen by you and people you choose. Private videos appear to others who visit the videos tab, will not appear to anybody who visits your video tab. So really, they are extremely private. Unlisted seems to be a very good happy medium. It's not necessarily searchable, but if somebody comes to your videos tab, and if you share the link with people, they will be able to view the videos. So for me personally, I find the unlisted setting is a good kind of common ground where it's not completely accessible to everybody, but yet it is shareable with those who might really need to see the information. If you're asking students to post their videos on YouTube, make sure you advise them to make their videos unlisted. This will allow them to post the link for others in the class to view, but not be necessarily searchable to anybody out there. And you may have wondered earlier why we didn't have the students just create Twitter accounts and post their tweets there. After all, wouldn't that be easier? What about other social media platforms, including Facebook or eBlogger? Some of your students may already have an account on these platforms, and they may not want to use it for their coursework, or they just may not be comfortable with creating a social media account. So again, this is kind of a shameless plug for what we'll be doing on Thursday, but it can also create FERPA violations and you know, just sensitive student information out there. And so we really want to make sure that our students' work is as protected as possible. So we'll just share with you here, we've got a list of references as well for some of the content that we've covered with you today. And at this point, I think we want to open it up for questions.
There is one thing that I want to bring up before questions, because this just came across my email yesterday. So I want to call your attention to another learning opportunity happening tomorrow. Steve Dotto, who is a Canadian technology guru, will be hosting a webinar Wednesday session tomorrow called Shifting to Online Teaching. And he's been interviewing community teachers, music teachers, dance instructors, fitness instructors about how they're navigating the change to online instruction and business. It's a free webinar. If you can't attend live, register for it, and he'll send you a link to the recording. But that link will only be available for 48 hours. And you can go to, it's called dottotech.com to register, dottotech.com. And we'll talk more about Dotto Tech on Thursday, but I didn't want you to miss this opportunity if you're interested.
Thank you, ladies. All right, we have a couple more questions. So one of them, the big elephant in the room, I have found that there are some faculty who are resistant to change. That is reflected in lack of interest to transitioning to courses online. Although your school is completely online, so your faculty are hired with that commitment already established, do you have tips on how to help faculty make the transition to online teaching? So while we are completely online and our faculty are ready to teach online, they do and sometimes are resistant to other things, such as, you know, putting in specific rubrics. Change, yes, pretty much a lot of people are resistant to change. So whether it's, you know, doing a certain quality matters item, using specific rubrics, anytime there's change, faculty are going to be resistant. People just don't like change by nature. One of the things you can do is make sure they have buy-in. Make sure they have a voice, sort of let them be heard, let them have some input in the process. You know, if they're used to having lectures, find a way to let them still have their lectures, but let them be heard while still, you know, if they like to lecture, let them lecture, but maybe have them do small sets of video lectures and find a way to use their lectures in an online platform. Find a way to meet them in the middle where they can do what they like to do and how they do it, but find a way to transfer to the online platform way, sort of work with them rather than against them. Tell them, okay, so you like to lecture, we need to go online for safety reasons, you know, because essentially what we're seeing right now, you know, without the online platforms, many people wouldn't have jobs. Many students wouldn't be able to still go to school. So it's sort of a necessity. But sort of, you don't have, it doesn't have to be, you know, an all or nothing. It can be, you know, a middle ground. So I would sort of try to find a way to work with them rather than against them, because sometimes they do have good ideas as how to, it can meet them in the middle. Ladies, do you have any other input?
I do, because I saw that question earlier. I could see that it was sitting there and I thought, But one of the things that I think that we all, everybody likes to be supported and believe that they have something worth sharing. Well, if you are faculty in a residential only program, the only students who can benefit from your knowledge are those who have the privilege of being able to come to campus. I live in a very rural part of Southeast Iowa. It is an hour and a half drive to get to the nearest university. In fact, that's an 1.5 hour drive for me to go to work when we have to go to campus. So without online, I never would have been able to complete my master's degree. So many more students can benefit from your knowledge, your expertise, your experience if you will transition to online. It's not always easy. It's not, it may be uncomfortable for a little while, but your reach, your ability to help students can expand beyond your wildest imagination. And I think that once people realize that they have that ability to share what they know with others, they can.
I'm going to piggyback to what she said too. It also increases the diversity. We have in our program, a lot of individuals who are in the field. They're working individuals. They have full-time jobs. They're out in the field doing public health. They're out, doing mission work. They're out on, out doing, public health surveillance. We have the single parents, the individuals working 2 jobs, those in remote areas. So it really does open it up to diversity. We have very diverse programs, and we have dual degree students who are also medical students, dental students, occupational therapy students. So it really opens up the diversity of the students that you can reach.
I would also,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would also add to that, as someone who worked at a residential university before coming to A.T. Still University, I worked with a lot of faculty who were resistant to taking their face-to-face courses online. And I think part of that just falls in the fact that there's you have to go through that uncomfortable period of learning more about what that means to be online and having to learn some new technologies. And I think if I have any advice for anybody working with faculty who are struggling with that is, if you're allowed to be residential, I mean, we don't know what this year is going to hold, but for those that really may be resistant, I usually ask them to pick one thing, take one thing and try and implement one new thing at a time. Don't try to take all of it at once, if that's at all possible. I realize right now we're in uncertain times and uncharted territory, but if we're back in a situation where they can teach face-to-face, they might even just implement one thing that they could translate online later and use it in kind of a flipped scenario. So maybe instead of giving a lecture in class, they take that information and they do some small chunked videos of their content, put a low stakes or no stakes quiz online before the student comes to class to kind of get comfortable with that process, while not trying to really take on too much at once.
Thank you. The next question was, you mentioned that you limit your classes to 15 per section. That's not a decision that most of us are allowed to make. What's the best practice or guideline for the appropriate size of online courses, and do you have references? Yes, and I actually sent them to ASPPH. They put together a document for online best practices. Quality Matters has done a lot of research on this, and I believe that for a graduate course, I think it's like 12 to 18 or 12 to 15, and for undergrad, I think it goes up to 25. The reason being, you want them large enough for interaction, but small enough for for interaction to actually be quality interaction. And so there are references and resources. They put out, it's in the, we can get it back sent to you. But yes, there is a lot of research and references on this regarding the amount of interaction and how to have the best quality interaction in online courses. Basically, if they're too large, students will get lost in the course. There's not enough, and you can't have a quality discussion. And if they're too small, same concept. You can't have a quality discussion. So there's like that optimum number. And that's why we chose that 15. And we do we mostly load our courses right around that 15. We're pretty good at it. And so we have had to at times shift and offer less electives to meet that 15, but we do try really hard to hit that 15. Sample syllabi. We could probably get you guys some samples. We're really, it's fun for us because we're constantly challenging each other to make them more interactive and more experiential. And we have fun with it. It's exciting to us. So we can definitely get you some samples and have Liz or ASPPH send them out. It's just, to us, it's a joy to put the courses together, and we're constantly challenging each other. Now, what can we do next? You know, what new technology is out there that, you know, the students can learn from? You know, we do make sure we hit seat time and competencies. All of our learning objectives are aligned to our SEEF competencies, and certain courses hit them, and, you know, the whole program is mapped out. Everything's ADA compliant. So, you know, it's a lot to think about. Each course takes, you know, probably hundreds of hours of development time, but, you know, it's a fun process. You know, we sit down with our instructors, you know, collaboratively with our instructional designers and the subject matter experts, and, you know, we'll sit sometimes 3 to 6 people in a meeting. There's numerous checks and balances along the way with the curriculum committee and everything, but we enjoy it. So any other pertinent questions before we turn it back over to Liz? I see we've gone a little bit over time. All right, well, thank you so much. We're going to hand it back over to you, Liz.
Great. Thank you, ladies. That was super, super. Your enthusiasm is infectious. We appreciate your expertise, the time you took, and the really simple, concrete examples, stories, guides, and tips you gave us. Your emails are here for those who wish to follow up. Post-event, feel free to reach out, especially for the questions you were not able to get answered. The webinar will be recorded, archived, and will be on our website very shortly. One of you asked about closed captioning. Unfortunately, we're not able to provide that for these webinars, but since the speakers did include in their notes, their script, we are going to, with the speaker's permission, put up a version of the PowerPoint slides where the notes will be apparent, and you could take a look at what they were talking about throughout the webinar.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you for that. If you just hang on an extra 30 seconds after we close the evaluation, it's one question. It's going to pop up on your screen. We'd really appreciate your taking time to let us know if we met the learning outcomes. Next event is this same team here. If you liked what you saw today, you're going to see more. Same time, Thursday, June 4th, 2 p.m. Eastern, Sidekick Survival Skills for Faculty. They're going to be covering some steps, supports, tips, tricks that you can access for putting on top-notch remote instruction. This concludes our webinar. Thank you.